All right, good afternoon and welcome for joining. Thank you for joining us in our session. This is the Computer Information Systems and Security session, one of the three that we'll be holding. So we will be having two more sessions next Saturday. So please come back and join us again. Our session today is titled Technologies, IT Practices, and Cybersecurity Policies in the New Normal. And we are very happy to have two of our alums here with us, Nayeli Rodriguez and Luis Forestier. Thank you so much for participating in this panel. We are very happy to have you. I just want to let everybody know we are recording this session and we will begin. So first, let me just give you a little bit of the logistics for this session. Attendee microphones are muted, so only hosts and our panelists are able to speak. However, if you want to communicate with us, please feel free to use the chat. The chat is active, and I will be monitoring the chat throughout the session. If you have questions, I will hold the questions until the end, but feel free to just chat them when you have them. I'll be keeping track, and then when we're finished with the presentations, I'll go ahead and ask the questions to the panelists. So again, thank you all for joining us, and let's get started. So first of all, let's just a little bit of information about who our panelists are. So our first panelist is Nayeli Rodriguez. Nayeli is an associate attorney at Monti and Ramirez LLP's Labor and Employment Practice Area. She advises private and public employees on a multitude of employment issues, including COVID-19 workplace compliance, wage and hour laws, FMLA matters, Form I-9, compliance and audits, and employment policies. She also represents and advocates on behalf of employers in the Department of Labor and ICE investigations. She's a first-generation American who grew up in Houston, Texas. She graduated from the High School for Law and Justice, where her love for the law began. She attended Our Lady of the Lake University here in San Antonio, Texas, and she graduated magna cum laude with a bachelor's degree in computer information systems and security. While at Our Lady of the Lake, Nayeli developed a passion for serving underrepresented communities and volunteer work. She hopes to continue service to her community and passion for advocacy through advising employers as to their rights and obligations arising in the employment context. Our second panelist is Mr. Luis Forestier. Luis was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico. He has amassed extensive experience in the field of information technology. Luis helped the largest bank in Puerto Rico resolve their Y2K issues. He has traveled throughout the Caribbean and Latin America for Hewlett-Packard, resolving various technical issues. He's also worked for companies like Dell and CISS in Texas. Luis ran the PC support team for Olu. He mentored many students who now have made a career in information technology. He was then recruited to create nationwide service desk for an international company, working with team members located in New York, LA, and San Antonio. Luis graduated with a Bachelor in Science in Computer Information Systems and Security from Our Lady of the Lake University, and he currently heads the help desk and student support hotline teams for Northside Independent School District. I welcome both of you. Thank you very much. And of course, I will be the moderator for the session. My name is Dr. Vanessa Garza Clark. I am full-time faculty here at the Lake of Computer Information Systems and Security, and I'm also the department chair, and I am happy to be moderating the session. So let's get started. Our first question: what are the most significant challenges organizations are still facing due to the move to a remote modality?
Well, challenges, there's many, right? I think the biggest challenge from the management point of view is changing the culture of management. Traditionally, you manage people where you could physically see them in person. And in the past, you know, there was this general impression that somebody working from home was an euphemism for slacking off and getting paid for it. Now, convincing management that supervising can be done remotely was a big challenge that I had to do when we were forced to move remotely. I got a lot of pushback on that, and there was a lot of arguments against working remotely. And in the case of the company that I was working at the time that we did our first move to work remotely, um, a lot of the senior management was very adamant of that. It shouldn't have been done, or it shouldn't be done. And this was before the general adoption from the rest of the companies. I believe since like you mentioned in the introduction, I have employees in places like New York and LA. In New York, the pandemic hit earlier than it hit here in San Antonio. So I was preparing my team before the county actually mandated the stay-at-home order. And some of my fellow managers uh, would argue that going remote was creating a panic. And that's one of those things where you say, no, nobody knows where the team is working from. So it's not going to panic anybody, because the only ones who know that they're working from home are the team members themselves. So I think that's the biggest challenges from the management point of view.
So, from my perspective, I have a lot of different types of clients. So, my clients range from private companies to higher education institutions, any industry from blue collar construction to grocery stores. And so, they come to me as their attorney with a lot of different issues. But some of the main ones that I've seen throughout the pandemic, and as Luis mentioned, are the productivity, um, the training to transition into a virtual workplace. So, um, a lot of my clients who have office spaces and have older employees who may not be accustomed to new technology, that was one of the big issues that they faced. Another thing is just reminding employees that the workplace rules still apply at home. So just because you're working, out of your home office or, on the couch, doesn't mean that you're not bound by these work rules. So that's one of the challenges that I've seen is just, how do we oversee our employees when we don't have them, right outside of our door.
Right, absolutely. Thank you so much. Luis, were you going to add something?
I was going to mention that sometimes things come up with a remote worker that are new for our company. Like I have an example of one worker who was helping out people through the phone, and apparently somebody in his family was in the background and they were using foul language. Of course, the person who's on the other side of the phone heard this, and it became a situation where it was very unprofessional. And those are the kinds of things that we have to address, because the people need to know that even though they're working from home, they have to maintain an adequate work environment, and that's a challenge.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So let's move on to the next question. What are the business and legal risks associated with this change we're seeing?
So I can talk a little bit about legal risks. As we just talked about, you're still having employee issues, HR issues. And one thing that I've seen are lawsuits or complaints for harassment in the virtual space. So a few months back, I read an article about an employee who had, an executive employee who had been discriminated on Slack. There were messages going around, emojis, things like that. I mean, that harassment, potential for harassment doesn't go away. And it's actually, I think, can be expanded in the virtual space where it's more visible to everyone. It has a wider reach. So that's one risk that's still there. Others are the potential for theft of business information. I mean, businesses spend, depending on the type of business, up to millions of dollars on research and development for new ideas, new products, new services. And so when employees are working from home and have access to this information, the risk is, it either gets shared by the employee to someone else, or it's stolen for a lack of security measures for that employee who's working from home. So those are two of the main risks that I've seen.
I think one other risk that we face is how to maintain an adequate accountability and supervision. Right, we're supervising people that, like Nayeli mentioned earlier, that are not outside our door. So you risk people who say they're working and they're not, or if something happens to them while they're on the clock but they're at home, where is the business liable? Is it something that we need to take care of? Those are those tricky areas that because the lines between home and work has been blurred, I think it's a risk for or any organization.
Thank you both. So let's move on to our next questions. What new policies do you recommend organizations implement?
Well, I think the main one is how productivity is valued. Before an hourly employee is its value, that person's value is based on how many hours that person worked, right? This is how you're going to get paid by the hour, and a lot of times you can't really tell if a person is really working or not. So we should have policies where we judge a person's productivity as opposed to if that person is physically on the clock or off the clock. That's something that I think should be implemented.
And just expanding on that, Luis, just having a remote work policy in general, I think is very important for any organization. Setting those expectations right off the bat, are you still expected to work 8 to 5, or is there going to be flexibility for you to work a longer day and maybe take more breaks throughout the day? There's also, as part of work expectations and moving to this remote environment, are businesses providing the technology necessary for employees to do their work? Will they be providing, internet stipends, cell phone stipends, whatever the case may be? I think there needs to be set expectations for that to protect the business, but also for the employee to have some clarification as to, well, what are their job duties? If they traveled before, that travel will probably end now, and when are they expected to come back to work? And then also policies for protecting business information. So making sure employees know, if you're downloading something off the company's server, it needs to stay on your, personal computer, or if you have a VPN, any type of cloud platform, making sure that if you want that employees either can't download that information or shouldn't, and then that they know that they shouldn't be doing these things. And also, what is the company's expectations for employees and their workspace at home? So are employees expected to have a firewall, to have use a certain internet browser, things like that? And who's going to pay for these things if an employee doesn't have, a computer or high-speed internet at home if they need it for telephone, video conference calls and things like that? So important to set expectations for the business and for your workforce.
Thank you. Can you please discuss the changes in cybercrime that have taken place? What are the repercussions and what are the solutions?
Well, I could tell you that in the environment that I am working right now, the type of the increase in cyber crime that I've seen is something which we call cyberbullying, right? Because the environment involves having a large number of, in my case, students who are now remote and all interconnected with different tools. It makes it easier for somebody to use those tools to harass and cause issues to the other students. And that's something that the organization I work for has made it clear that they want to make it prevent that as much as possible. And the solution for them is to make sure we have adequate monitoring tools to make sure that the tools that we are providing are not facilitating any type of situations that could lead to that type of issues. And like Nayeli mentioned earlier in answer to another question, tools like VPN and things are things that help the remote workers to make sure that they are not exposing the company or the organization to any other type of theft of information or compromising any type of things like that.
One thing that I've seen arise in is phishing and email phishing scams. I've gotten so many, our firm has gotten so many. Our receptionist always, email us, "Is this legit?" And we're all like, "No, don't click on the link." So I've seen a big rise in that. And, that's an attempt to steal financial information, business information, personal information. And so the repercussions for that are very serious for the employee and for the business. What are the solutions to that? I think one part of it is training. From what I've seen, a lot of small businesses who maybe don't have the resources for training their employees might be a little bit more vulnerable to those types of attacks because they just haven't received the training. And even with training, sometimes, we fall for these types of email spam or internet links. But I just think making employees aware of maybe sketchy emails or even phone calls. I know I've gotten a lot of junk calls throughout the pandemic. And so I mean, I don't answer the phone if I don't recognize the number. So I wouldn't typically fall for that, but I'm sure like older people do. And so there's always going to be a rise in crime when there's situations like these where people lose their jobs. And so we just have to be aware of it, training yourself, but also your employees as a business on how to recognize a phishing email.
Thank you for your answers. The next question is, have you seen a change in employee productivity, whether it be for better or for worse?
I think it depends. I've seen it for my clients on both ends, where if it's an industry that can kind of easily transition to a remote environment, it's easier for their employees to be more productive. I know in one of the earlier sessions, there was a speaker from CPS Energy, and he talked about how their office employees were kind of able to transition into a work environment, and it's worked out great for them. They've been able to meet remotely. and stay on top of the projects that they've had to. But in some other industries, like I have grocery store clients, employee morale has really gone down, especially because we're all concerned about COVID, and the exposure to COVID for those types of retail employees is really high. And so when morale is down, productivity goes down. But I've also seen, like Kroger, HEB do hazard pay for these employees as a solution to kind of keep morale up, putting all these CDC COVID-19 guidelines into place, having the shields with the cashiers, having face masks, making customers wear face masks. So I think every business has to analyze their productivity levels. And like Luis mentioned, maybe change the way that you analyze productivity. Maybe it isn't, hey, you're working 40 hours, you're doing great. Maybe it's, hey, I assigned you this project, what's your progress? Or, you brought in different types of clients. It just has to be maybe a different analysis for productivity.
Yeah. And I've seen in the organizations that I've worked for that there's been an increase in productivity, and the reasoning given is that because the person is working at home, they can accommodate their personal life easier, and they will fit it into work time and are willing to stay longer. I ran into a situation where I needed additional people to work after hours because we were implementing a change for our customers, which are our students and parents. And more of my team was willing to work overtime because it didn't involve having to drive home from work very late or stay in the office until late at night. So in that sense, there was an increase in productivity, increase in willingness of to participate. Now, there's been times where people forget that they're working and they take longer breaks, but that's where having an adequate way to monitor them will help in making sure that they don't confuse the fact that they're working from home means that they're on vacation, right? So I think that in general, it's an increase.
Thank you. It's really nice to see both sides of that, of the productivity issue. Our next question is, what changes do you foresee in the future because of this? How are organizations going to change?
I think there's going to be an increase in remote positions and more investment in the tools so that you could track attendance and time for those remote workers because right now, for example, when we first went remote, the tools that we had to track employee hours were based on a time clock. Well, that time clock stayed at the office, so how do you track the time for a person that is not working in the office? So things started by starting to make a spreadsheet and do this and that, and eventually it evolves into something more formalized. So I think the changes is to make sure that the companies invest in those technologies and tools to be able to track those better.
I definitely agree with you, Luis. I think there's going to be more virtual or remote positions opening up, and then maybe even just more hybrid where you work certain days at the office and certain days at home, kind of how the school systems are doing it, where a group of students goes to class 1 week and then they learn from home the second week or the next week. And I also agree about the productivity, generating more software and applications that track productivity, as well as software and apps that can protect a business's information, because now it's out there. I'm bringing home client folders, or I'm downloading. Well, not me, because I have a VPN at work. But if I were an employee, and we don't have that, then I'm downloading business information, sales reports, client leads onto my laptop. And so I think businesses are going to invest more in technology to help them manage their business information, whether it be proprietary or just sales reports, client leads, things like that, and then also tracking productivity. So I agree with you, Lisa, on those items.
Thank you both. And at this point, we're going to open the floor for questions from the audience. And I do have the first question already. What challenges do you see companies having as they move to AWS?
Well, I could answer that because we ran into this situation in both of the companies that have overseen the move to remote working. The move to AWS and other cloud solutions is something that predated this remote workflow, but the fact that our workers are increasingly remote has accelerated that, because the fact that if our solutions, our tools are not in the cloud, it would require VPN into our company resources at the office, at the data center. So this has given more emphasis of the convenience of having them in the cloud, and more responsibility of assuring that the information stays secure. So that's the challenge that we're facing.
I don't have anything to add to that response.
Thank you, Luis, for your response. Just a reminder, if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will go ahead and read the question for our presenters. And I do have one more question for you guys. Do you recommend any technologies or practices, software that can help improve the security posture of remote workers?
So I think we talked about a few of those already, either having a cloud platform, making sure it's secure, or having some sort of VPN for employees to be able to access whatever they need, whatever company information that they need. Training is very important. Training on phishing, training on what are the new challenges in a virtual workspace. Those are the things that I can think of right now.
Yeah, I agree with Nayeli. The tools that we use right now, such as like she mentioned, VPN, it becomes increasingly important when people are all over the world. When we say working from home, it doesn't mean that they're at home all the time. They could be working from a coffee shop. They could be working from a library, from a fast food place with Wi-Fi, and that's fine, just as long as we know that that information is not being compromised. And something like a VPN required for sensitive information, good two-factor authentication for logging into our solutions. Those are the kinds of things that would help that a lot. Just like previously, before working remote, things like two-factor authentication were always important, but not necessarily seen as completely necessary. Now I think there's no way that we could justify not having that type of technology to make sure that our tools aren't being accessed by other parties.
Yeah, I agree. And also, you know, while I'm thinking of business information, when we worked in an office environment, we're used to just having, printouts of things and maybe sharing files with people who may not necessarily need access to it. And so having different types of security tools to keep files confidential and maybe only share it with people who need to have access to that information, and having a way to track who sees a certain document would be important as well.
I could give an example of how we've had to increase the use of certain tools. In the past, our accounting department would share between the different employees information spreadsheets with account numbers and things like that. Now, with the employees working remotely, they have started using email to share that kind of information. So we've had to implement data loss protection type software to detect that kind of information going through an email to make sure, hey, don't send that through email. That could be forwarded. That information could get lost. Information could be shared outside the company. Don't do that. Let's find another way to do this. And that type of tools that could help us identify those security risks are important in this type of environment.
That
Absolutely.
kind of triggers my memory on one tool, and I know I used it at a company where I interned, is having a system where you can categorize your emails. So if it has highly sensitive information, or if it's just, a plain email that doesn't have any controversial information or any proprietary information, I think that's also kind of important. And then for us as attorneys, we use or we put in our emails labels like attorney-client privilege or attorney work products. I think that's another way to kind of keep track of different type of information that's being shared, either with coworkers or with clients or vendors, people outside of the company.
Yes, and thank you for your responses. And we have a couple comments here shared by Gloria, which made me think of a question for our panelists. So Gloria was saying, most companies use VPN and most companies require two-factor authentication. And I'm wondering what your point of view is. Do you think that most companies, I know you see a lot of different types of organizations, right? You see professional organizations, smaller, larger. So do you feel like a lot of organizations really are using VPN and two-factor authentication, or do you see a difference in depending on size of organization or type?
Please, do you want to handle it?
Okay. Well, I've seen an increase in the use of these tools. I could give you as an example, apart from my work with the districts and the companies, I also consult different companies. And one of the companies that I consult was a pediatric office, right? You'd say, well, they don't need a lot of technology. They just need to get their medical records and whatnot. But then again, their their medical biller is working remotely. Their office manager is also working remotely. So how do you maintain that sense of security that all this personal information is not going to be compromised? So what I had implemented for that office is to set up VPN through their router. And the nice thing is all this could be implemented at no cost to the organization, because the router that they purchased allowed them to set up a VPN connection to the router from anywhere. So we set that up for their medical biller and for their office manager. And whenever those folks are working from home, they have a laptop with that a VPN software that connects to the router and it creates that tunnel. So I think even the smaller business are using that. Now the two-factor, I get a lot of pushback on that. It interferes, but when I explain to them how somebody could, by a phishing attack or something, take their credentials and then use it against them, then they come get aboard on the two-factor.
Yeah, I think it's a work in progress. I think a lot of companies would love to have everything, locked down, no stealing information, but it's not always a reality. But I do see, even as Luis mentioned, smaller companies with maybe not two-factor authentication, but maybe we're changing passwords more frequently, or we're having more training on different types of internet scams. So I think, I don't know that I've seen it at all companies or all with all my clients, but I think it's a work in progress, and especially now that we're moving into, or we are in a more virtual world, I think companies are taking it more seriously.
Thank you. And this is a question for both of you, but probably particularly oriented more towards Nayeli. We talked about policies, right? Implementing new policies in organizations. Are there resources? If I have an organization, that's fairly small, and I want to implement some policies, how can I go about even, finding out what policies and how to word them, and how can one do that?
Well, for any business, Google is always going to be your best friend. That's where I start a lot of my searches as well. There's a lot of free resources out there. On Google, you can find a lot of different templates. There's a lot of HR also, organizations that might have templates out there for you for, like, a remote work policy or a business continuity policy, and information assurance policies. There's a lot of different organizations that have templates, or that have groups that come together to create resources for those who may need it. So I would start with a broad Google search. SHRM is a big HR consulting organization, and they have a lot of different policies and articles on their website that are very helpful, just as a starting point for businesses who may not have the resources to hire an HR consultant or an attorney to draft policies for them.
Thank you so much for that. Luis, do you have anything to add?
No, I just want to say whatever Nayeli said, that
You support her answer.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, do we have any other questions from the audience at this time? We have about 5 more minutes for our panel presentation.
Meanwhile, I wanted to mention that my team that works from home, they have a setup where they're using VPN, so the people that they serve have no idea that the team is working remotely. And I think in the environment that we work in, where we have some of our employees that have to be physically in the classroom, it helps out because the teachers don't want to really know that there's some members of the team who are able to work remotely while they have to be in the classroom. So this gives them a sense of normalcy, I think, as opposed to saying there's just different classes of workers, some that have to be in person and others that are remote. So I think it helps out when the work is done without emphasizing the fact that that person is remote or not.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Luis. Any other comments or questions from the audience at this time? All right. Well, we only have a couple of minutes left in our session, and you have a little bit of time to ask if you have any additional questions. But I just want to thank our panelists. Thank you so much, Luis and Nayeli. It was great having you. You guys are fantastic resources, and I really love having two different points of view, right? And you guys, it was a great combination. Thank you so much for bringing all this knowledge to the table, and we appreciate that you're willing to come back, right? And come back to Oldu and do things like this for us. So thank you so much from all of us here at Our Lady of the Lake. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. We hope that you enjoyed the presentation. If you think of questions that you might want to ask our panelists after we've ended the session, don't worry. You can send me an email, vgclark@olusa.edu. I will put it in the chat. And if you have any questions for our panelists, I can definitely forward those questions to them after this session has ended.
Thank you, Dr. Clark, for allowing me to participate. It was good to see some people I knew from way back when I worked over there, and I do enjoy mentoring those who are planning to get into the technology field. I feel it's something that somewhere where I could give back to the community.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And we hope that other alum or current students that are here are willing to come back and do this sort of thing for us, because I think it's really nice to have, once you guys have gone and are now in the industry, it's really nice to get your point of view for other alumni and for our current students. So it is definitely appreciated. Thank you all. And
Yeah, thank you for having me.
thank you, Nayeli. And remember, we do have another part of the conference happening next Saturday. So please tune back in with us. We have, as far as computer information systems and security topics, we do have 2 more sessions next Saturday. So please come back and join us for those. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you, Luis.
See you. Talk to you later.
Yep.